Most of you are old enough to remember a show that started in 1956, and of course some of you were not, but the show was basically, they had a celebrity panel, and then they had 3 contestants, and at the beginning of the show, the contestants would stand up and say, let's just use a biblical character. I'm John the Baptist. Hi, the next one get up and say, hi, my name is John the Baptist. And the third one get up and say, hi, my name is John the Baptist. And then the celebrities, you remember this show? And then the celebrities would ask them questions. They have a time limit to ask them questions. Now, the one who truly was John the Baptist, he had to tell the truth. But the other 2 could lie. So trying to convince the other ones that he was John the Baptist, right? And so they'd go through this period of time, and they would ask questions, and at the end, the celebrities would vote on who they thought John the Baptist was. And the more answers they got wrong, the more money the contestants made. So the object was to act or to be as much like John the Baptist as you could, right? And John the Baptist was never a contestant. I'm just using him as a character. So to be John the Baptist. And so they would vote, and then, after they pick, who they wanted, and so I picked number 1, and you picked number 2, and then they say, "Will the real John the Baptist please stand up?" And of course they would be like, they go up and down, and finally one of them would stand up, and he was the real John the Baptist, right? And I don't know what that has to do with anything that I'm going to be preaching about, but I just like that game show. No, I'm just kidding. It piques my curiosity because I'm one of those people who like to figure things out. I like to figure things out before everybody else knows them. Like, I just figured out I won't stand there. But I'm one of those guys, I like to know things. I like to be confident and knowing things. I mean, Christmas isn't fun for me because I already know what I'm getting. I'm one of those guys. Is that, I can pick up a package and say, it's a shirt, pair of pants, it's a book. And so I don't even pick them up anymore because it just makes people mad. And they just want to return them. So, and then they'll put like bricks in the pants and stuff. That doesn't work. I figured out you got a brick and a pair of pants in here. So I'm pretty good at that. And usually I just use common sense, kind of figure it out if I've asked for a book and it's in a box shaped like a book and it slides back and forth like a book, and it's probably a book. But still, my percentage of guessing is pretty good. I'm the guy who figures out the movie before it's all over. That's just the way I am. I just want to know. Don't you want to know? Don't you like to know? Or how many of you like to be surprised? I hate surprises. I like to know. I'm just that guy. But what we're going to be talking about today is a very serious question that's asked by believers and non-believers. And that is, who is God? Don't you want to know? Or do you already know? Or who is God to you? Maybe. And do you think if we asked and it went around the room and you wrote down your answers before you could hear everybody else's answers, do you think they'd be the same? No, because I think people experience God and who they think of God is, I think they experience it differently at different times in their life and through different experiences in their life. And some of you are farther down that spiritual journey than some others. It doesn't make you wrong or better or worse. It just makes you in a different place. Is that fair to say? Am I off base here? Okay. So, and I can remember my own spiritual journey, which has traveled only 58 years, and not nearly as far as a lot of yours, but I can tell you mine's been, it's evolved, it's changed. When I was young, when I used to go to Catholic school, I thought God was somebody to be feared. Have you ever been there? Have you ever thought like that? I mean, I was kind of afraid like God because the nuns were the representatives of God in my eyes, and they were always angry. They were always mad and carrying around a ruler, and they were just like waiting to for you to mess up so they could strike your hand and get you back on the right trail. And I'm like, that must be what God's like. you know? And I'm like, God's following me around with lightning bolts. And if I mess up, he's, you know? And if it wasn't lightning bolts, he was at least watching over me all the time, following me. And I couldn't mess up because I was afraid, right? I was afraid. God was something I feared. Because that's kind of what was displayed to me. It was kind of like the dentist, you know? How you fear the dentist? Anybody here? Am I the only one? As a kid, I tell you, I was, not now, but as a kid, I was petrified of the dentist. Because the dentist only brought one thing. Pain. It brought me pain. That's the only thing the dentist ever gave me was pain. So, so I was afraid of him. I didn't want to go to him. That's kind of why we shouldn't be afraid of God. Because then we're afraid to what? To go to him, aren't we? God isn't a God to be feared. He is a God to be respected. And so don't get me wrong on what I'm saying, because I do respect him and I do respect his power and his authority and what he can do. I'm not diminishing any of that. But what I'm saying is to approach God as being fearful keeps you from experiencing God to the fullest, because you're going to keep your distance because you're afraid of what he can do. Does that make sense? You're afraid that he's always going to smite you. You know, I think that's the right word. Smite you, or he's going to knock you down, or he's going to hit you. He's always going to be punishing you, right? Kind of like, you know, the only thing you know about your dad is wait till he gets home. Well, then you're going to always be afraid of him, right? If you don't experience anything good, and the only time you ever hear his name is that wait till he gets home. You're going to be afraid. So that's not the God that I see. You see, because my view of God has evolved through the years, and I see God in a completely different way. Now, we'll talk about that later. I see God completely different. You see, I see God as a God of love. Because I think that's the most, there's a lot of ways to describe God. There's a lot of words to describe God. And if I asked each of you for something, you could give me something different. You could say, well, God's, you know, he's my great provider. You know, he's my great healer. He healed me of this ailment. He's a lot of things to a lot of different people. But ultimately, I think it all comes back to, and what I know in my heart is that this is God is love. God is love. He loves you. He loves me. He loves the world. God is love. And the scripture today tells us just that. God is love. So if we're looking to see what God is, if we're looking to explore or expand our minds, then we need to understand that God has this unique love for us. Not that cheap love that we get here on earth. Not that what can you do for me love. Not that I'm going to break your heart love, or disrespect you love, or desert you love, or abuse you love. Not that garbage. God loves you unconditionally. He loves you just as you are. You are his children. And those of you who have children understand this. Children have faults. Right? Most children have. Mine don't. Most children, and we may not have children, but we've all been children. Most children have faults, but so do their parents. The difference is we're God's children, but he don't have any faults. But we still do, don't we? And he still chooses to what? Love us. So a lot of times, well, I think that's why he sent Jesus down here, to live among us. So we could kind of see what God looks like, you know? To see what God looks like. You know, a lot of people say, well, nobody's seen God, right? Nobody knows what God looks like. You remember that story of the kindergarten girl drawing the picture? The teacher walked up behind and said, what are you drawing, sweetie? She said, I'm drawing God. She said, nobody knows what God looks like, sweetie. She said, well, they will in just a couple of minutes. But we don't always know, you know, we don't know what God looks like, but we know enough about God. No. You know, there was a mention this morning in Sunday school class about Sunday school the difference between Sunday school and Bible study was brought up. In Bible study, it brings you, Sunday school you're being taught something, right? In school you're being taught, right? Is that fair? We go to school to learn. But in Bible study it's more personal. It seems to be more personal, and it seems to be more interaction by the individuals who are attending there. There's more input from different segments of life. You see, because we all experience God differently, don't we? It doesn't mean you're going to not learn anything, but we're just going to learn things differently, aren't we? Because we're on a spiritual journey. You know, the more we learn about God, the closer we draw to God. Right? So when we look at God and we start getting a little confused, like, is that God vengeful? Is that God mad? Is that God? We just need to look to the Scripture. Because it's very clear in here. It tells us, right here in today's verse, verse 16, God is love. You say, well, what about those other things? What about those things where God appears to be angry? Well, let me give you an example of something. Here's an example. When your parent told you you had to be home by 10 o'clock and everybody else was letting their kids stay out till 11 or 12 and you were mad. You were mad. It was probably much earlier than that back in your day, but you were mad because you had to come home. Now, why do you think they told you that?
For your safety.
For your safety. They were looking out for you. Did it seem like they were?
No.
No, of course not. You knew better than them. They were old. You were young. You had a fresh mind. You know, everything was working. But no. You know, and sometimes I think we treat God that way. God's looking out for us, and yet we're what? Thinking we know what's best. I know what to do. I know you got a plan, God, but this is a better plan. We ever get like that? Don't you lie, it's church. But we do. But we do. But what that is that parent is expressing their love for their child, are they not? If they didn't care, they say, oh, go, whenever. Be back tomorrow sometime. You know, if they didn't care, they wouldn't make rules. If they didn't care, they wouldn't want them, don't run out in the street without looking both ways. Next time you do that, I'm going to... Yes. And why do you think they say that? Not because they don't like the child? No, of course not. They say it because they love the child. Right? When God gives us commandments, because He doesn't like us? Because He wants bad for us? Because He wants harm for us? When He says love your God with all you have, and love your neighbor, is that because He wants bad things to happen to us? You're not sure?
Nope.
No? No? No, it's because He loves us. You see, that there's love in all of that. God loves His creation. He seeks a relationship with His creation. He has always sought a relationship with His creation. Not because He has to, but because He wants to. And some of you say, well, I don't have that relationship and I can't be in that relationship with God because, you know what, I got too much junk in my life, you know, and I'm not making great choices and I'm a broken and you don't know my past and all these things that are just, you know, when I get good enough, then I'm going to, you know, me and God will get right. And that's just lies. That's just lies that the world's telling you. That's lies that Satan's telling you. That's just lies. You see, you don't have to be anything but accepting of God's grace to be in a relationship with God. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but I would say, actually, I'd bet my house, but then I would give my house away. So I would bet what I have that there are no perfect people in this room. Will the real perfect person please stand up? There is none. Not here. Not today. Nothing. Some of you saying, but I'm close. I'm close. I'm close. No, you're not. We all got work to do, don't we?
Amen.
Yep.
Now, God gave us those commandments because it's important first for us to love God, isn't it?
Yep.
That's His first commandment. Love God with all you got. Everything. I'm all in. Whatever I have is yours, God. I'm trusting in you, God. I'm believing in you for everything. I'm trusting you in every situation. My concentration is on you, not on the world. You're the center of my heart. Everything is about you. That's loving God with all you got. And then from there it tells you, love your neighbor. Now, why do you think those things aren't reversed? You ever thought about that? What if it said, love your neighbor as yourself, and then I want you to love me with all you got? You ever think about that? Why are they in that order?
I don't think you can love your neighbor if you don't love God.
I think that's true.
God comes first.
God always comes first. But there's more to it than that. You see, and I think Billy kind of hit on it there, is that when you love God and you're in that relationship with God, when you can spend that quiet time with God, when you can feel His presence in your life each and every day. Now, I don't know how many of you have prayer time, right, have each day. I hope all of you do. But prayer time is alone time, isn't it? Have you ever been in a room with somebody and you were so into them you didn't notice anybody else in the room?
Yeah.
Have you ever been like that? Like you're having a conversation, they could be robbing the place and you just be like, you know, you're just so into the conversation. They have your undivided attention. You have theirs, and you know, it's like the whole world could go on and the place could close and everybody go home and y'all still be sitting. You ever been in that place? Yeah, not just romantically, but even with like your grandparents or something. Have you ever snuggled into your grandparents? I can remember as a child snuggling into my grandmother, and she would sit there and she would tickle my arm on my back. And it always felt so good. I wish I could go back. I'd love to feel that touch again. She would just tickle and she'd sing. And you know, we didn't speak the same language because she spoke Spanish and I spoke English, but we spoke the same language of love. Because see, in her arms and leaning against her, I felt loved. I felt like I had her attention, that I was important, that I was valued. You see, sometimes you don't need words, do you? But you see, when we're in prayer, that's how we should feel with God. We should feel like we should know we have His undivided attention and we should give Him ours as well, right? Because there's a special feeling that comes from spending that alone time with God and being in His presence. It's kind of like snuggling up to Grandma. You know, we all need that in our lives, don't we? Because when we spend that time, and we spend that one-on-one time with God, we feel what? We feel valued, right? We feel important. We feel loved, don't we? You see, and you need that in your life, because if you don't have that in your life, then pretty soon, if you try to do it on your own, you'll run out of love. If you try to just love your neighbor, there comes a point where you're going to say, I've just given too much and I'm not doing it anymore. Because you're not getting rejuvenated, you're not getting filled with love, you're just being empty of love. Does that make sense? In other words, I'm just draining, somebody's draining all the love I have, but nobody's putting love in. God puts love in every day. He fills you up so you can fill other people up. So His love is essential to our loving other people. They're connected. Does that make sense? They're connected. Let me demonstrate. I'm going to try to demonstrate that this, demonstrations are only as good as the person performing them. Remember we talked about perfect people? That's not me. So I'm going to try this. But this is, let's just say this is God's love right here. And these are the people in our lives right here. Okay? And so as God's love pours, let's make sure God's love pours into us and overflows from us, what does it start to do?
Kill others.
We start to fill other people up, don't we? We start to, little by little, love them more and fill them up to where we're overflowing. And they're being filled up too. Right? Does that make sense? And pretty soon they'll be overflowing. And if I had a cascade of glasses, they'd be overflowing. Each level. When we love other people, then they know how to love other people. Does that make sense? That's why love is so important. And you say, well, how do I know what that looks like? I told you earlier, God sent Jesus so we would know what love looks like. So we would know what God looked like. Philip one day came to Jesus and said, show us what God the Father looks like. And Jesus told him, he said, you've seen me, you've seen the Father, right? In other words, Jesus said, ta-da, this is what God looks like. The things that you see, the things that I do are the things that God would do. In other words, God is compassionate, God is kind, God is loving, God is uplifting. God is love. So if we want to be like God, if we want to see what God, we want to know what God is, we only need to look to Christ. He came. Did you notice that Christ came and the people that Christ encountered always seemed to leave His presence in a better place? The only ones who didn't, that were so caught up in their religion that His love didn't make any sense to them, that what He was doing didn't make any sense, and it challenged their authority in the temple or in the religious hierarchy. But everyone else that comes into His presence pretty much leaves a better person, or at least has been given the advice to become a better person than they were when they entered His presence. Fair statement? Fair statement. So my question to you is then, when everybody who comes into your presence, do they leave being blessed by having been in your presence? Do we treat them with love? See, because we're not treating them like love, we're not really representing Christ. Are you representing the angry God? Or do we show up differently every day? Say, today I'm going to be angry God, and I'm going to be mean to everybody, or today I'm going to be loving God? Because it really doesn't say God is mean or God is angry. It just says God is love. Pretty simple, isn't it? Jesus said, come to me as a child, right? In other words, I think He said that because I think as we get older, we get kind of hard-headed. We get stuck in our ways. We kind of think we know it all. But when children come to you, they're open, aren't they? You can tell a child anything. Small children. I tell them stuff all the time. They believe it. It's like it was the truth. I'm just playing around. I'm just playing around. But a lot of times they'll come to me and ask questions. And children believe stuff, especially young children. Why? Because their mind is just open to the possibility of anything. And I think we need to come to God like that as well. Knowing that the realm of possibility, that all things are possible through God. And that God is love. And that He loves each of us individually. with all our imperfections, with all our shortcomings. But everything, I guess the best way to put it is, he knows you, right? He knows you better than your spouse. He knows you better than your parents. He knows you better than your children. He knows you better than your best friend. He knows you. And in spite of that, he loves you. In spite of all you are or all you have been, he loves you. Think about that for a minute. Embrace that. Breathe that in. There's nobody's going to love you more than God. Because God is love. That's right. If you don't hear anything else today, if you've been asleep, wake up for just a minute, because I'm about to finish. Is that I want you to understand something. I don't follow Christ because I'm afraid of Christ. I follow Christ because I love Christ. And Christ loves me. And he loved me enough to pay my debt on the cross. So that through him I could spend eternity in the presence of God. There's really no greater love than that, is there? Not from your spouse, not from your parents, not from your best friend. Because that's a godly love. And as much as we'd like to do it, we're just not capable. But that doesn't mean we stop trying, does it? That doesn't mean that tomorrow we should try to be better than today. And the day after that, better than the day before that. And so on and so on. That we grow closer to God through our actions that represent our love. It's good to tell people you love them. It's important. Whether it's your spouse or your parents or your children, let them know you love them. But there's also ways of expressing love without saying a word. Just like my grandmother would let me snuggle up and she would tickle. And no words were exchanged. We didn't speak the same language. But I knew without a doubt that I was loved. You can express that same thing to your children, your grandchildren, your parents, your grandparents, and all those you encounter each and every day. But first we need to understand that God is love and that we might need some improvements. And if we're willing to take the right steps, God's love can cascade through us into others. And 1 second at a time, 1 day at a time, we can change the world. From the hateful place that it is to a loving place. And in that, and in doing that, we will have represented God. And all God's people said,